Taliban cell targeted, single-dad veterans family. Their commander personally delivered apology letter. But instead of bullets crashing through his window, the man who once swore to kill them walked up his porch with tears in his eyes, holding the letter no one ever expected to exist. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The morning sun filtered through the kitchen curtains, casting warm patches of light across the worn linoleum floor. Sam Reynolds stood at the stove, his movements practiced and deliberate as he flipped pancakes with one hand while steadying himself against the counter with the other. The old injury in his leg was acting up again, but he refused to let it show. "Emma, breakfast is almost ready," he called up the stairs, pride creeping into his voice as he arranged the pancakes into a smiley face on the plate. A silly tradition he'd kept up since Emma was little. "Coming, Dad!" Emma's cheerful voice drifted down, followed by the sound of hurried footsteps. Sam smiled to himself, remembering how his wife Sarah used to tease him about his pancake artistry. The memory brought its usual bittersweet ache, but he pushed it aside as Emma bounced into the kitchen, her backpack slung over one shoulder. "Smiley face pancakes," she beamed, dropping into her chair. "You always know how to make Monday mornings better." Sam limped over to the table, setting down her plate. "Well, someone in this house has to be a morning person, and we both know it's not you." Emma giggled, drowning her pancakes in maple syrup. "How's the leg today?" she asked, her bright eyes studying him with that perceptive look that sometimes made him forget she was only 15. "It's fine, sweetheart. Just the weather changing." Sam eased himself into the chair across from her, grimacing slightly as he stretched out his leg. "Did Mr. Peterson call about the construction job?" Emma asked between bites. Sam shook his head, pushing his own breakfast around his plate. "Not yet. But don't worry about that. I've got some savings. And there's always work for a guy who knows his way around a toolbox." "I know, Dad." Emma reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "You always figure things out, but you don't have to do everything alone, you know?" Sam's throat tightened at her words. She was so much like her mother sometimes, that same gentle strength, that unwavering faith in people. "When did you get so wise, huh?" "Must be all those smiley-face pancakes," she quipped, but her eyes were serious. "Mom would be proud of us, wouldn't she?" "Yeah, kiddo, she would." Sam cleared his throat, fighting back the emotion that always surfaced when they talked about Sarah. "She'd especially be proud of your math grade this semester." Emma's face lit up. "Miss Thompson says I might be able to take advanced placement classes next year. That's my girl." Sam watched as she finished her breakfast, marveling at how she'd grown into such a remarkable young woman despite everything they'd been through. "Got your lunch money?" "Yep." Emma stood, gathering her dishes. "And I've got study group after school, remember? Jenny's mom is giving me a ride home." Right. Sam nodded, checking his watch. "Better get moving then. Don't want to be late." Emma hurried to put her dishes in the sink, then wrapped her arms around him in a quick hug. "Love you, Dad. Love you too, sweetheart." Sam held her tight for a moment, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. "Have a good day." He watched from the kitchen window as she walked down the driveway, waving to their elderly neighbor, Mrs. Martinez, who was already out tending her roses. The morning sun caught Emma's dark hair, making it shine just like Sarah's used to. Sam busied himself cleaning up the breakfast dishes, trying to ignore the persistent ache in his leg. The house felt too quiet without Emma's presence, the silence broken only by the gentle hum of the dishwasher and the distant sound of morning traffic. He glanced at his phone, still no call from Peterson Construction. The savings wouldn't last forever, but he'd been through worse, much worse. The memories of those days in Afghanistan threatened to surface, but he pushed them back down where they belonged. Grabbing his cane, something he only used when Emma wasn't around to worry, Sam made his way to the front door. The morning paper would be there, and he needed to check the mail anyway. Maybe there'd be some work leads in the classifieds. The spring air was crisp as he stepped onto the porch, nodding to Mrs. Martinez, who called out a cheerful "Good morning." He retrieved the paper from the lawn, then made his way carefully down the steps to the mailbox at the end of the driveway. Inside were the usual suspects: a few bills, a grocery store circular, and a plain white envelope with no return address. Sam frowned, studying the envelope as he made his way back inside. His name and address were typed, not handwritten, and something about it made the hair on the back of his neck stand up, an old instinct from his military days that had never quite gone away. Back in the kitchen, Sam set aside the bills and paper, holding the mysterious envelope up to the light. It was thin, containing what looked like a single sheet of paper. With steady hands that betrayed none of his unease, he carefully opened it. The message inside was brief, typed in plain black letters on white paper. As Sam read the words, the kitchen seemed to grow colder, the morning sunlight no longer warm and welcoming but harsh and exposing. Samuel Reynolds and family, identified as symbolic target by Taliban cell, operating in United States. This is your only warning. Sam's legs gave out, and he dropped heavily into the kitchen chair. The paper trembled in his hand as he read the message again and again, the words burning themselves into his mind. The quiet house suddenly felt vulnerable, its walls too thin, its windows too numerous. His first thought was of Emma, walking innocently to school, completely unaware that their peaceful life had just been shattered. His second thought was of all the faces from his past, faces of men he'd fought alongside, faces of the enemy, faces of the innocent caught in between. The morning that had started so normally with smiley-face pancakes and his daughter's laughter now seemed like a dream, replaced by the nightmare he'd always feared might find them. Sam sat motionless at the kitchen table, the warning letter crushed in his trembling hand, as the sound of Mrs. Martinez's gardening drifted through the window, a reminder of the normal world that suddenly felt very far away. The neon sign of Lou's Diner buzzed and flickered against the darkening evening sky. Sam Reynolds pulled his worn pickup truck into the nearly empty parking lot, his hands gripping the steering wheel a moment longer than necessary. The letter sat heavy in his jacket pocket, its weight seeming to grow with each passing hour. Inside, the familiar smell of coffee and grilled onions wrapped around him. Mike sat in their usual booth, 2 steaming mugs already on the table. Some things hadn't changed since their army days. Mike was still punctual to a fault. "You look like hell," Mike said by way of greeting, his weathered face creasing with concern. Sam slid into the vinyl booth, the material squeaking beneath him. "Good to see you too." Betty, the elderly waitress who'd been serving them for years, shuffled over. "The usual for you boys?" "Thanks, Betty," Sam nodded, waiting until she was out of earshot before reaching into his jacket. Mike leaned forward, his coffee untouched. "So, what's this emergency meeting about? You're not usually one for cryptic phone calls." Sam pulled out the envelope and placed it on the table between them. The paper was crisp, ordinary, the kind you could buy at any office supply store. But its contents were anything but ordinary. Mike picked it up, his expression hardening as he read. The fluorescent lights overhead cast harsh shadows across his face, emphasizing the deep lines around his mouth. "Jesus Christ, Sam. Yeah, you need to take this to the police, FBI even." Mike's voice was low but intense. "This isn't something to sit on." Sam wrapped his hands around his coffee mug, seeking its warmth. "And tell them what? That I got a vague threat from someone claiming to be Taliban? You know how that'll go." "This isn't like before," Mike insisted, referring to their shared frustrations with military bureaucracy. "This is your family we're talking about, Emma. Don't." Sam's voice came out sharper than intended. "Just don't." Betty returned with their burgers, the plates clinking against the Formica tabletop. Neither man touched their food. "Remember Kandahar?" Mike asked after a long moment. "How many times did paperwork and protocols slow us down? How many times did we lose?" "This is different," Sam interrupted, though doubt gnawed at him. "We're not in Afghanistan anymore." "Exactly my point." Mike pushed his plate aside, leaning in. "We're on American soil. There are actual laws here, actual protection. Use it." Sam stared out the window at the empty street. The small town's quiet had always been a comfort before. Now every shadow seemed to hold potential threats. "I'll think about it." "Don't think too long," Mike warned, finally picking up his burger. "You've got Emma to consider." They ate in silence after that, the weight of the letter's threats hanging between them. Sam barely tasted his food, his mind racing through possibilities, contingencies. The soldier in him wanted to act, to protect. The father in him worried about alarming Emma needlessly. When they finished, Mike insisted on paying. "Promise me you'll at least talk to Sheriff Wilson tomorrow," he said as they stood in the parking lot. "He's a vet too. He'll understand." "I'll handle it," Sam assured him, though he wasn't sure how. The drive home was a blur of streetlights and worried thoughts. Sam's old injury ached, a phantom pain that always flared up when stress hit. He pulled into his driveway, noticing the kitchen light still on despite the late hour. Inside, Emma sat at the kitchen table, her math homework spread out before her. A plate of reheated lasagna waited next to her books. "You didn't have to wait up," Sam said, trying to keep his voice light. "Someone has to make sure you eat properly," Emma replied with a smile that reminded him so much of her mother. "How's Mike?" "Same as always." Sam sat down, touched by her thoughtfulness. "Stubborn as a mule. Must be why you two get along so well." Emma gathered her books, pausing to kiss his cheek. "Don't stay up too late, Dad." Sam watched her head upstairs, grateful for her presence yet terrified by his need to protect her. After finishing the lasagna, he began his nightly security check, a habit he'd never quite shaken after returning home. The back door was locked, windows secure. But when he reached the front door, something caught his eye. Another envelope had been slipped underneath, its white edge barely visible in the porch light. With trained caution, Sam retrieved it, his heart hammering. This one was different, heavier paper, formal letterhead. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it, eyes scanning the carefully written words. The signature at the bottom made his blood run cold. Rahim, former Taliban commander. But it wasn't the threat he'd expected. Instead, the letter spoke of regret, of a desire to make amends. The writer claimed to be coming to America, wanting to meet Sam in person, to apologize. Sam read it 3 times, trying to make sense of it. The formal tone, the careful penmanship, the surprising humility, it all seemed surreal. He glanced up the stairs, where Emma's bedroom light had just gone out. Then, back at the letter in his hands. How could he possibly tell his daughter that the very people who had once tried to kill her father now wanted to sit down and talk about peace? The first rays of sunlight crept through Sam's kitchen window, casting long shadows across the wooden table where he, Saturday. His coffee had gone cold, forgotten, as he read Rahim's letter for what felt like the 100th time. The paper was crisp, the handwriting precise and measured, not what he'd expected from a Taliban commander. "I write to you not as an enemy, but as a man who has seen too much death," the letter began. Sam's jaw tightened as he continued reading. "The orders I gave caused pain to many families, including yours. This burden weighs heavily on my conscience." Sam ran his fingers through his graying hair, studying each carefully chosen word. The letter spoke of regret, of sleepless nights haunted by memories of violence. It mentioned a desire to make amends, to bridge the gap between worlds torn apart by war. "Could be a trap," Sam muttered to himself, pushing back from the table. The morning light caught the dust motes dancing in the air as he paced the kitchen floor, his old injury making each step a little uneven. His tactical training screamed at him to be suspicious, to assume the worst. But something in the words, their raw honesty perhaps, made him pause. The wall clock ticked steadily as Sam grabbed his keys. He needed guidance, and he knew exactly where to find it. First Presbyterian's parking lot was empty, except for Pastor John's ancient blue Volvo. The church stood quiet and dignified, its white walls gleaming in the morning sunday. Sam's footsteps echoed through the empty sanctuary as he made his way to the pastor's office. Pastor John looked up from his desk, his kind eyes crinkling behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Sam? This is earlier than I usually see you." He gestured to a comfortable chair across from his desk. "Got something I need your opinion on, Pastor." Sam eased himself into the chair, wincing slightly as his bad leg protested. He pulled out the letter and handed it over. The pastor read in silence, his expression thoughtful. The only sound was the gentle whir of an old ceiling fan and the occasional rustle of paper. When he finished, he carefully folded the letter and looked at Sam over his glasses. "What do you make of it?" Sam asked, his voice gruff with emotion he didn't want to show. Pastor John leaned back in his chair. "You know, Sam, sometimes God works in ways we least expect. This could be a door opening, not just for you, but for healing that goes beyond one person or one family." Sam let out a short, harsh laugh. "Healing? Pastor? This man? This Taliban commander? He's responsible for." His voice caught. "How can you suggest forgiveness here?" "I'm not suggesting anything, Sam. I'm just noting that this letter shows remarkable humility. That's rare, especially from someone who once held such power." The pastor's voice was gentle but firm. "Remember what Scripture tells us about forgiveness? With all due respect, Pastor, Scripture didn't see what I saw over there. Sam stood up, his movements sharp with tension. It didn't lose brothers in arms. It didn't. He stopped, thinking of Emma's mother. No, Pastor John agreed quietly. But it did give us a path forward from even the deepest wounds. He held the letter out to Sam. Just think about it. That's all I'm asking. Sometimes the hardest paths lead to the most necessary healing. Sam took the letter back, folding it carefully into his pocket. He nodded stiffly and turned to leave, but Pastor John's voice stopped him. Sam, whatever you decide, you're not alone in this. The church, this community, we're here for you and Emma. The drive home was a blur of conflicting thoughts. Sam's hands gripped the steering wheel too tightly, his knuckles white with tension. The letter seemed to burn in his pocket, demanding attention, demanding a decision. Evening found him in the kitchen with Emma, the letter lying between them on the table like a living thing. Emma pushed her spaghetti around her plate, stealing glances at her father. Dad? Her voice was soft, careful. Maybe we should keep it? At least for now? Sam looked at his daughter, really looked at her. She had her mother's eyes, wise beyond their years. You think that's the right call? Emma set her fork down. Mom always said that holding on to anger was like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. She reached across the table, her small hand covering his larger one. I'm not saying we have to do anything, just don't throw it away yet. Sam felt something shift in his chest. Not acceptance, not quite, but perhaps the tiniest crack in the wall he'd built around his heart. He squeezed Emma's hand gently. Okay, kiddo, we'll keep it. He managed a small smile. Your mom would be proud of you, you know that? Emma smiled back, relief clear on her face. She'd be proud of you too, Dad, for even considering it. They finished their dinner in comfortable silence, the letter no longer feeling quite so heavy between them. Sam still felt the weight of suspicion, the soldier in him refusing to lower his guard completely. But as he watched Emma clear the table, humming softly to herself, he allowed himself to consider the possibility, however small, that sometimes peace could begin with a single letter. Sam's boots echoed against the worn linoleum floor of the VFW hall. The familiar smell of coffee and old wood usually brought comfort, but today something felt different. The usual warm greetings were replaced by cold silence. Conversations died as he walked past the small groups of veterans gathered around their usual tables. He caught fragments of whispered conversations. Can't believe he'd even consider it. After everything we went through over there. Mike sat at the bar, shoulders hunched over his coffee. When their eyes met, Mike quickly looked away, guilt written across his weathered face. Sam's stomach twisted. He knew then who had spread the word about Raheem's letter. Morning, fellas, Sam said, trying to keep his voice steady. A few muttered responses, most just stared into their cups. These were men he'd shared stories with, men who understood the weight of war memories. Now they looked at him like he was wearing the enemy's uniform. Bill Thompson, who'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan, pushed back his chair with a screech. Got some nerve showing up here, Reynolds. His voice carried through the quiet hall. Thinking about having tea with the Taliban now? It's not that simple, Bill, Sam said, keeping his voice low and controlled. You don't know the whole story. What's to know? Bill's face reddened. They killed our brothers, and now you're ready to roll out the welcome mat for one of their commanders? Other veterans nodded in agreement. The word traitor floated from somewhere in the back of the room. Sam felt the familiar tightness in his chest, the same tension he used to feel on patrol when something wasn't right. Mike finally spoke up, but his words brought no comfort. I tried to tell them you weren't thinking straight about this, Sam. That maybe you needed our help to see reason. Sam's jaw clenched. Appreciate the concern, Mike, but my thoughts are plenty straight. He turned to address the room. I haven't decided anything yet, but if there's even a chance for what? Bill cut him off. Peace? Understanding? They understand one thing, Reynolds. Force. You used to know that. Sam left without another word, the weight of their judgment following him out into the bright morning Sunday. He had expected resistance, but the reality of it stung more than he'd anticipated. Later that afternoon, Sam pushed a shopping cart through Morton's grocery, trying to focus on his list rather than the morning's confrontation. Emma had requested her favorite pasta for dinner, something normal to hold on to in this increasingly complicated situation. Sam Reynolds? He turned to find Sarah Chen, whose son had played Little League with Emma, Her usually friendly face was tight with concern. "Is it true?" she asked, glancing around before continuing in a lower voice. "About you meeting with one of them?" Sam's grip tightened on the shopping cart. "Mrs. Chen!" "My cousin was in the Twin Towers," she said, cutting him off. "How could you even think about it? These people, they're monsters. They don't want peace." "Mom?" Emma's voice came from behind them. She stood holding a box of cereal, her eyes wide with confusion and hurt. Sam hadn't even noticed her walking up. Sarah Chen's expression softened seeing Emma, but she shook her head and walked away, leaving her half-filled cart in the aisle. The drive home was silent. Emma stared out the window, hands folded tightly in her lap. Sam wanted to explain to make her understand that adults sometimes faced impossible choices, but the words wouldn't come. That evening, over plates of spaghetti, Emma finally spoke. "Dad, are people really mad at you because of that letter?" Sam set down his fork, choosing his words carefully. "Some people are scared, honey. When people are scared, they sometimes get angry instead of trying to understand. But if this man really wants to say sorry," Emma pushed her pasta around her plate. "Isn't that what Mom always said was important? Forgiveness?" Sam's throat tightened at the mention of his late wife. Claire had always been the one to push for understanding, to look for the good in people. "Your mom was a wise woman," he managed. "Then why is everyone so mad? I heard Tommy at school saying his dad called you a traitor." Emma's voice cracked slightly. Sam reached across the table and took her hand. "Listen to me, Emma. Whatever happens, whatever people say, we know who we are. Sometimes doing the right thing isn't the same as doing the easy thing." Emma squeezed his hand back, offering a small smile. "Mom would be proud of you for at least thinking about it." Later that night, after Emma had gone to bed, Sam sat at the kitchen table with Rahim's letter spread out before him. The house was quiet except for the soft ticking of the clock on the wall, the one Claire had picked out years ago. His fingers traced the careful handwriting. Each word seemed to carry the weight of both his past and his future. The faces of his fallen comrades flashed through his mind. Young men who would never come home, never see their families again. He owed them something, didn't he? Loyalty? Remembrance? But then there was Emma's face in the grocery store, confused and hurt by the hatred she'd witnessed, and Claire's voice in his memory, always gentle, always pushing him to be better than his anger. The letter lay between these two worlds, between the soldier he had been and the father he needed to be. Sam sat there for a long time, the clock ticking away the minutes, as he tried to find his way through the darkness towards something that felt like truth. Sam sat at his kitchen table, staring at his coffee gone cold. The morning sun cast long shadows through the window when his phone rang. The unfamiliar Washington, D.C. area code made his stomach tighten. "Mr. Reynolds, this is Diana Martinez from the International Peace and Reconciliation Initiative." The woman's voice was professional but warm. "I'm calling regarding Rahim Abdullah's request to meet with you." Sam's hand gripped the phone tighter. "How did you get this number?" "We're a federal program, Mr. Reynolds. We've been working with Mr. Abdullah for the past 18 months. He's currently in the United States under our supervision, participating in our reconciliation program." The room seemed to tilt slightly. Sam steadied himself against the table. "He's here? In America?" "Yes, sir. He arrived last week and has been fully vetted by multiple agencies. His presence here is legal and monitored. He's been working with us to build bridges between former combatants." Sam rubbed his face, feeling the rough stubble under his palm. "Why me? Out of all the veterans?" "Mr. Abdullah specifically requested you. He mentioned an incident in Kandahar province, 2009. Sam's coffee mug clattered against the saucer. That date, that place. The memories he'd tried so hard to bury came rushing back. "Mr. Reynolds, are you still there?" "Yeah," he managed. "I'm here. Would you be willing to meet with him? We can arrange security protocols, neutral location, whatever makes you comfortable." Emma bounced into the kitchen then, backpack slung over one shoulder. She froze when she saw her father's face. "Dad, what's wrong?" Sam held up a finger, asking for a moment. "Miss Martinez, I need time to think about this. Of course, please call me when you've made your decision." She gave him her direct number and ended the call. "Dad?" Emma set her backpack down. "Was that about the letter? About Rahim?" Sam nodded, still processing. "He's here, in the country. Some kind of peace program." Emma's face lit up. "Really? That's That's amazing! She grabbed a cloth and started wiping down the counter. We should clean up the house. Maybe get some new curtains for the living room? The old ones are kind of faded. Whoa. Slow down. Sam stood up. I haven't agreed to anything yet. But Dad, this could be important. Like, historically important. She gestured enthusiastically with the cleaning cloth. Remember what Pastor John said about forgiveness? It's not that simple, sweetheart. Why not? She started organizing the magazines on the coffee table. We could move the armchair to make more space. Maybe get some of those little cookies Mrs. Peterson always brings to church. The doorbell interrupted her planning. Sam opened it to find Mike and 2 other veterans from his unit, Dave and Carlos. We need to talk, Mike said, his face grim. They filed into the living room, nodding hello to Emma. Hi, Uncle Mike, Emma said brightly. Did you hear? Raheem's really coming. The men exchanged dark looks. That's what we're here about, Dave said, his voice gravelly. Sam, this is crazy. You can't let that man anywhere near your home. He's been vetted, Sam said, surprising himself by defending it. There's a whole federal program. Since when do you trust the feds? Carlos interrupted. Come on, man. Think about Johnson. Think about Martinez. Our brothers died because of this guy's orders. Emma's smile faded. She clutched the cleaning cloth to her chest. What if it's a trap? Mike leaned forward. What if he's got sleeper cells waiting? You'd be putting not just yourself at risk, but Emma, the whole neighborhood. I haven't decided anything yet, Sam said firmly. Dad. Emma's voice was quiet but steady. Mom would want us to try. The veterans fell silent. Sarah's name always had that effect. She'd been loved by the whole unit, always baking cookies for their families, writing encouraging letters during deployments. Mike stood up, placing a hand on Sam's shoulder. Just think hard about this, brother. Real hard. The others followed him out, leaving behind a heavy silence. As the sun began to set, Sam needed air. He told Emma he was going for a walk, promising to be back before dark. The evening air was cool on his face as he limped down their quiet street, his old injury aching with the change in weather. He noticed the subtle movements, curtains twitching, blinds shifting. Old Mrs. Wilson, who usually waved from her porch, hurried inside as he passed. The Thompsons' kids, normally playing basketball in their driveway, were nowhere to be seen. At the corner, Bill Chen was watering his prized roses. He'd lived next door to Sam for 5 years, shared countless barbecues. Now he turned away, focusing intently on his flowers. A police cruiser drove by slowly, the officer watching Sam's house with careful attention. Word had spread fast, probably half the town knew by now. In a small community like theirs, news like this traveled at light speed. Sam stopped at the end of his street, looking back at his home. The porch light was on, Emma probably already worrying about him being out after sunset. The American flag by their door fluttered gently in the evening breeze. Sarah had hung that flag, insisting it represented not just their country, but hope for a better world. The other houses looked the same as always, neat lawns, family cars and driveways, kids' bikes leaning against garage doors. But something had changed. Every window seemed to hold watching eyes. Every porch light illuminated judgment. His decision wouldn't just affect him and Emma anymore. It would ripple through this entire community, changing relationships, challenging beliefs, maybe even putting people at risk. Or maybe, as Emma and Pastor John suggested, it could heal something broken. Sam stood there in the growing darkness, feeling the weight of more than just his combat gear now, the weight of a choice that could change everything. The late September morning air felt crisp and clean, carrying the scent of fallen leaves across Sam Reynolds' front yard. He sat rigidly on the wooden porch steps, his hands clasped tightly together to hide their slight tremor. Next to him, Emma perched on the edge of the top step, fidgeting with the sleeve of her blue sweater. Dad? Emma's voice was barely above a whisper. Are you okay? Sam managed a tight nod but couldn't find his voice. The clock on his phone showed 9:58 a.m., 2 minutes until the scheduled arrival. His eyes swept the quiet suburban street for what felt like the 100th time that morning. A black government-issued sedan turned onto their street, moving with deliberate slowness. The car's polished surface gleamed in the morning sun as it approached their driveway. Sam's chest tightened. He forced himself to breathe, conscious of Emma's concerned glance. The sedan came to a stop in their driveway, its engine falling silent. Sam rose to his feet, his old injury making his right leg stiff. Emma stood too, unconsciously moving closer to her father. The back door opened, and a man emerged slowly. Rahim was older than Sam had imagined, perhaps in his early 50s. His hair had gone mostly gray, and deep lines marked his face. He wore a simple dark suit that hung loosely on his thin frame. What struck Sam most was how the former Taliban commander moved carefully, almost hesitantly, with a slight limp that spoke of old wounds. Two men in suits, obviously federal agents, exited the front of the car but remained standing beside it, maintaining a respectful distance. Rahim paused for a moment, taking in the modest two-story house with its white siding and blue shutters. His eyes moved to Sam and Emma, and something flickered across his weathered features. Was it nervousness? Fear? Sam couldn't tell. The former commander began walking toward them, each step measured and deliberate. In his right hand, he carried a cream-colored envelope, holding it like it contained something precious. The morning sunlight caught the slight tremor in his hands. Emma touched her father's arm gently and whispered, "I'll give you some space." She retreated to the doorway, but Sam could feel her watching, could sense her hope for something good to come from this impossible moment. Rahim stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, keeping a respectful distance. His eyes met Sam's, and in them, Sam saw not the fierce warrior he'd expected, but a man carrying a weight of regret so heavy it seemed to bend his shoulders. "Mr. Reynolds," Rahim said softly, his accent thick but his English clear. He paused, swallowed hard, then continued, "I thank you for allowing this meeting." Sam remained silent, his jaw clenched tight enough to ache. His right hand instinctively moved to his leg where the old shrapnel wound throbbed with phantom pain. Rahim noticed the gesture, and his eyes filled with understanding and what looked like shame. He bowed his head slightly and extended the envelope with both hands, a gesture of respect in his culture. "This letter," Rahim said, his voice barely above a whisper, "contains words I have spent years trying to find, words that perhaps can never be enough, but words I must speak nonetheless." Sam stared at the envelope. Through the screen door he could hear Emma's soft breathing, feel her silent encouragement. With stiff movements, he reached out and took the letter. The paper felt warm from Rahim's hands. The morning breeze rustled the maple trees lining their street, sending a shower of red and gold leaves spinning through the air between them. A neighbor's wind chimes tinkled softly in the distance. In this quiet moment, these two men, once enemies across a battlefield, stood facing each other on a peaceful American street. Rahim lifted his eyes to meet Sam's again. They were dark eyes, filled with a pain that seemed to mirror Sam's own. When he spoke, his words carried the weight of years of reflection. "May I enter?" The question hung in the cool morning air. Sam stood motionless, the letter heavy in his hands, as the weight of history and the possibility of future pressed against him like a physical force. Behind him, Emma held her breath, waiting for her father's response. Sam's silence stretched out, filled only by the sound of falling leaves and distant wind chimes, as the moment balanced on the edge of change. The veterans lined up behind his window came to Sam's mind. The whispers of "traitor" echoed in his ears. But so did Emma's voice from the night before. "Mom always said forgiveness sets us free, Dad." The sealed envelope in his hands felt like it carried the weight of every battlefield he'd ever walked, every loss he'd ever suffered. Yet somehow, it also held something else, something that might be the first step toward healing. Standing there in the golden morning light, Sam Reynolds faced the hardest decision of his life since returning from war. Before him stood a former enemy asking for entrance to his home. Behind him, his daughter holding her breath with hope, and in his hands, a letter that might change everything. Sam stood in his doorway, his hand gripping the brass doorknob so tightly his knuckles turned white. After what felt like an eternity, he stepped aside, gesturing silently for Rahim to enter. The Taliban commander, former commander. Sam corrected himself mentally, moved with careful, measured steps into the modest living room. Emma hurried to clear some magazines from the coffee table, her movements quick and nervous. "Please, sit down," she offered, motioning to the weathered brown armchair. Rahim nodded gratefully and lowered himself into the seat, his movements betraying what looked like an old injury to his hip. Sam remained standing, arms crossed, until Emma touched his elbow gently. "Dad," she whispered, "maybe we should sit too?" Her gentle prompt broke through his rigid stance, and he settled onto the couch, positioning himself between Emma and their visitor. "I'll make some tea," Emma announced, breaking the heavy silence. She disappeared into the kitchen, leaving the two men in uncomfortable quiet. Rahim's weathered hands rested on his knees, his eyes taking in the family photos on the walls, pictures of Emma's school achievements, Sam in his military uniform, and a beautiful woman with Emma's smile who appeared in older photographs. "Your wife?" Rahim asked softly, nodding toward one particular frame. "Yes." Sam's response was clipped. "She passed 5 years ago. Cancer." "Allah yarhama," Rahim murmured, then translated, "May God have mercy on her soul." He paused, his eyes growing distant. "I too know the pain of loss." Emma returned carrying a tray with 3 mugs of steaming tea, setting them carefully on the coffee table. The familiar scent of chamomile filled the room. She'd chosen Sam's mother's old china cups, the ones with tiny blue flowers around the rim. "Thank you, child," Rahim said, accepting the cup with both hands. "You have your mother's kindness in your eyes." Emma smiled softly, settling next to her father. Sam remained tense, but his daughter's presence seemed to anchor him. Rahim took a small sip of tea before speaking again. "I had a son," he began, his voice heavy with memory. "Kamal. He was 15, like you." He nodded toward Emma. "He died in a drone strike 7 years ago. The strike was meant for me, but instead—" His voice trailed off. Sam shifted uncomfortably, his tea untouched. "I was not a good man then," Rahim continued. "I believed in violence, in revenge, in an endless cycle of blood for blood." He placed his cup down carefully. "When Kamal died, something in me died too. But something else was born. Understanding. I saw how my actions, my hatred, had brought destruction to my own door." Emma leaned forward slightly, her eyes filled with compassion. "I'm so sorry about your son," she said softly. Rahim nodded in acknowledgement. "Since that day, I have worked to undo what I can. I cannot bring back those who died, your brothers in arms, Mr. Reynolds, or my son, but I can try to stop others from walking the path I once did." Sam's jaw clenched and unclenched. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "Why come here? Why us?" "Because," Rahim said, meeting Sam's gaze steadily, "your unit was one that suffered greatly from my orders. And because I heard you were a man of honor, even in war, I thought, perhaps, you might be one who could understand the possibility of change." Sam stood abruptly, pacing to the window. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the living room floor. His mind raced with memories, explosions, screams, the faces of men he'd lost. But now those images collided with the quiet, dignified man sitting in his living room, speaking of his dead son. "Dad." Emma's voice was gentle. "Maybe this is what Mom meant about breaking cycles." Sam turned back, studying Rahim's face. The man's eyes held no deceit, only a deep, familiar pain. The same pain Sam saw in his own mirror some mornings. They talked for hours as the sun slowly set. Rahim spoke of his work with peace initiatives, of speaking to young men about rejecting extremism, of the death threats he now received from his former allies. Sam gradually asked questions, his tone moving from hostile to cautiously curious. As evening settled in, Rahim stood to leave. Emma brought his coat, and he thanked her with a small bow. At the door, he turned to Sam. "I do not ask for forgiveness, Mr. Reynolds. I ask only that you consider that change is possible, even in those we once called enemies." Sam nodded stiffly, but managed to look Rahim in the eye. They watched from the porch as the black sedan pulled away, its taillights growing smaller in the gathering darkness. Emma slipped her hand into her father's. "He's telling the truth, Dad," she whispered. Sam stood silent, watching until the car disappeared completely into the night. The morning sun cast long shadows across the hardware store's weathered floorboards as Sam pushed through the glass door, the bell chiming overhead. He needed supplies to fix the kitchen sink, a simple task that felt wonderfully normal after yesterday's tense meeting with Rahim. The familiar smell of sawdust and metal brought comfort as he made his way down the plumbing aisle. "Well, if it isn't the peace ambassador himself." Sam's shoulders tensed at Mike's harsh voice behind him. He turned to find his old friend leaning against a shelf of pipe fittings, arms crossed over his chest. Mike's face was hard, his usual friendly demeanor replaced by something cold and unfamiliar. "I'm just here for supplies, Mike," Sam said quietly, reaching for a pipe wrench. "That's it? That's all you have to say?" Mike pushed off from the shelf, taking a step closer. "You let that murderer into your house. The same people who killed Thompson Martinez. Remember them? Your brothers?" Sam's grip tightened on the wrench. "Of course I remember them. Every single day. Could have fooled me." Mike's voice rose, drawing the attention of other customers. "You're having tea parties with the enemy while their blood isn't even cold in the ground. It's been 12 years, Mike." Sam tried to keep his voice steady. "And Rahim isn't—" "Don't you dare say his name like he's some kind of friend." Mike's face flushed red. "You're spitting on their graves, Reynolds. On every soldier who died fighting those animals." The wrench clattered to the floor as Sam spun to face Mike fully. "You think this is easy for me? You think I don't see their faces every night? Then act like it," Mike shouted. "Instead of playing diplomat with a killer." Several customers were openly staring now. Old Mr. Henderson behind the counter had stopped pretending to sort nails and was watching with concern. "You don't get to judge me." Sam's voice shook with barely contained emotion. "You don't get to tell me how to honor our brothers." "Someone has to, since you've clearly forgotten what honor means." The words hit Sam like a physical blow. Without another word, he stormed past Mike, shoving through the door so hard the bell nearly flew off its mount. The morning air felt thick in his lungs as he limped to his truck, his old injury flaring with each angry step. Later that afternoon, Sam heard Emma's key in the front door. Something was wrong. Her footsteps were too quick, too urgent. He looked up from his paperwork just as she rushed past the kitchen, her face hidden behind a curtain of dark hair. "Emma?" he called after her, rising from his chair. "Honey, what's wrong?" A muffled sob was his only answer as she disappeared up the stairs. Sam's heart clenched as he followed, taking the steps 2 at a time despite his protesting leg. He found her face down on her bed, shoulders shaking with quiet tears. "Baby girl," he said softly, sitting on the edge of her bed. "Talk to me." Emma rolled over, revealing red-rimmed eyes and tear-stained cheeks. "They're saying horrible things, Dad. At school. About you, about us." Sam's jaw tightened. "Who is?" "Everyone." Emma's voice cracked. "Jessica. She used to be my friend. She said we're terrorist sympathizers, that we're betraying America." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "Tyler pushed all my books off my desk in history class. Nobody would sit with me at lunch." Sam felt a familiar rage building in his chest, the kind he hadn't felt since his combat days. But Emma needed her father now, not a soldier. He took a deep breath, forcing his hands to unclench. "Come here," he said softly, opening his arms. Emma curled into his embrace like she used to when she was small, her tears soaking into his shirt. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. So sorry you're going through this." "Why are they being so mean?" Emma's voice was small, muffled against his chest. "We're not doing anything wrong." Sam stroked her hair, choosing his words carefully. "Sometimes people let fear turn into hate." "And hate makes them forget their own humanity." He pulled back slightly to look into her eyes. "But that's not your burden to carry. You've done nothing wrong." "Promise?" Emma sniffled, looking so young and vulnerable it made his heart ache. "I promise." Sam wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "And I promise I'll protect you, no matter what anyone says or does. We're going to get through this together." Emma managed a weak smile, and Sam held her until her breathing steadied, and she drifted into an exhausted sleep. He tucked her in gently, just like he used to when she was little, and quietly made his way downstairs. The setting sun painted the sky in deep oranges and purples as Sam stepped onto his front porch, needing some air to clear his head. The peaceful evening seemed to mock the turmoil of the day, until his eyes fell on the white picket fence he'd repainted just last spring. There, in angry red letters 3 feet high, someone had spray-painted a single word: traitor. Sam stood frozen, staring at the crude graffiti as darkness crept across his lawn. The words seemed to glow in the fading light, an ugly reminder that this storm was far from over. Sam's fingers trembled slightly as he dialed the number the Peace Initiative liaison had given him. Each ring felt like an eternity until Rahim's quiet voice answered. "Yes? Hello? This is Sam Reynolds," he said, his throat tight. I think we need to talk more. Would you meet me at First Methodist? Pastor John will be there." There was a pause on the line. "Of course, Mr. Reynolds. Whatever makes you comfortable." They arranged to meet in an hour. Sam paced his living room, second-guessing himself until it was time to leave. The church's red brick walls came into view as he pulled into the parking lot. Pastor John waited by the fellowship hall doors, his kind face creased with concern. "You're doing the right thing, Sam," the pastor said, squeezing his shoulder. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The fellowship hall smelled of coffee and old hymnals. Sam chose a seat at one of the round tables, positioning himself so he could see both exits. Old habits died hard. Pastor John busied himself preparing coffee at the small kitchen counter. When Rahim arrived, he moved carefully, as if afraid to disturb the sacred quiet of the space. His shoulders were hunched beneath his plain brown jacket. Dark circles under his eyes suggested sleepless nights. "Thank you for meeting again," Rahim said, taking a seat across from Sam. Pastor John joined them, setting 3 steaming mugs on the table. "I need to understand," Sam said, his voice rougher than he intended. "All of it." Rahim nodded slowly, his hands wrapped around the coffee mug. "I was not always as you see me now. Once, I believed absolutely in the righteousness of my cause. I gave orders." He paused, swallowing hard. "Orders that I knew would kill innocent people." Sam's jaw clenched. The coffee in front of him went untouched. "There was a village," Rahim continued, his eyes fixed on some distant point. "We had intelligence that American soldiers were sheltering there. I ordered an attack without waiting for confirmation." His voice cracked. "There were no soldiers, only families. Children." Pastor John sat silent, his presence a steady anchor, as Rahim's words filled the room. Sam's hands had balled into fists beneath the table. He thought of Johnson, Martinez, all the friends he'd lost to similar attacks. "After that day, I began to question everything. But it was the death of my own son that finally broke through my blindness." Rahim's eyes met Sam's, filled with unspeakable grief. "He was killed by the very violence I had helped create. That is when I knew this cycle of hatred must end." Sam stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. He walked to the window, trying to steady his breathing. Outside, birds flitted between the church's maple trees, oblivious to the weight of history and pain filling the room behind the glass. "I understand if you cannot forgive me," Rahim said quietly. "I cannot forgive myself, but I must try to make amends, to show others there is another path." Sam turned back, his voice hoarse. "The men I lost, they had families too, children who will never see their fathers again." "Yes," Rahim nodded, tears now falling freely. "This is why I am here. Not to erase what was done, but to acknowledge it, to bear witness to the pain I caused, to say I am sorry, though sorry feels too small a word." Pastor John finally spoke, his gentle voice filling the silence. "Sometimes the first step toward healing is simply being willing to listen to each other's pain." Sam sank back into his chair, exhausted. The anger was still there, but something else too. A crack in the wall he'd built around his heart. "I have written letters," Rahim said, pulling an envelope from his jacket, "to the families of those lost in my attacks. This one is for you, but I understand if you do not wish to read it." Sam stared at the envelope for a long moment before taking it with trembling fingers. He didn't open it. "I should go," Rahim said, rising slowly. "Thank you for hearing me." He bowed slightly to Pastor John, then walked out, his footsteps echoing in the empty hall. Sam sat there, the unopened letter heavy in his hands. Pastor John moved to stand beside him, placing a weathered hand on his shoulder. "The hardest battles are not fought overseas, but inside our hearts," the pastor said softly. Sam nodded, unable to speak. Minutes later, he was in his truck, driving home through the gathering dusk. The letter lay on the passenger seat, unopened. His mind replayed Rahim's words, wrestling with anger and understanding, hatred and hope. The familiar streets of his hometown passed by in a blur as he drove in silence, deep in conflict. Emma sat cross-legged on her bed, a pink notebook propped against her knees. Her pencil hovered over the blank page as she gathered her thoughts. Through her window, the late afternoon sun cast warm shadows across her desk, where a framed photo of her mother smiled back at her. "Dear Mr. Rahim," she wrote, then scratched it out. "Dear Rahim." She started again, the words flowing more naturally now. Her pencil moved steadily across the page as she poured out her heart. "I want to thank you for being brave enough to come here. Not many people understand, but I do. My mom always told me that peace starts with one person being willing to take the first step. She paused, glancing at her mother's photo. Sarah Reynolds had been known for her work with refugee families, always bringing home stories of hope and redemption. Emma smiled, remembering how her mother would say, "Every person carries a light inside them, sweetheart. Sometimes it just needs someone else to help it shine." My mom passed away 3 years ago, Emma continued writing. But she taught me that forgiveness isn't just about saying sorry. It's about making things right. That's what you're trying to do, isn't it? Down the hall, she could hear her father moving around in the kitchen, preparing for Rahim's upcoming visit. The sound of pots and pans clanking made her write faster. "Dad's trying really hard," she wrote. "He pretends to be tough, but I know he's hurting. Sometimes at night, I hear him in Mom's garden, talking to her about everything that's happening. I think meeting you has made him think about things differently, even if he won't admit it yet." Emma detailed memories of her mother's peace work, her father's struggles since returning from war, and her own hopes for healing. The words flowed easily, filling 3 pages with her neat handwriting. "Maybe someday," she concluded, "people will look at what's happening here and realize that enemies can become friends. That's what Mom would have said. Thank you for helping prove her right." She signed it simply, Emma Reynolds, and folded the pages carefully, sliding them into an envelope. After addressing it to Rahim, she slipped it into her desk drawer, planning to give it to him at his next visit. The following afternoon, Rahim arrived precisely at 2 o'clock. Emma watched from the kitchen as her father greeted him at the door, still stiff but less hostile than before. She waited until they were settled in the living room before retrieving her letter. "Would anyone like some tea?" she asked, entering the room with the envelope partially hidden behind her back. "Thank you, Emma," Rahim said with a gentle smile. "You are very kind, like your father tells me your mother was." Sam shifted uncomfortably in his chair but didn't object to the mention of Sarah. Emma saw her chance and stepped forward, holding out the envelope. "I wrote this for you," she said quietly. "Emma!" Sam's voice was sharp with surprise and concern. "What are you doing?" But Rahim had already accepted the envelope with careful hands. "May I?" he asked Sam, showing respect by seeking permission. Sam's jaw worked back and forth as he struggled with the situation. Finally, he gave a curt nod, his eyes fixed on his daughter with a mix of worry and disappointment. Rahim opened the letter slowly, his weathered hands treating the pages with reverence. As he read, his expression changed. Tears began to well in his eyes, dropping silently onto the paper. He made no move to wipe them away. Sam watched, his anger fading into confusion as he saw this former Taliban commander moved to tears by his daughter's words. The room was silent, except for the soft sound of paper rustling as Rahim turned each page. When he finished reading, Rahim pressed the letter to his chest, just over his heart. "Your daughter," he said to Sam, his voice thick with emotion. "She speaks with the wisdom of angels. She understands what many adults cannot, that the path to peace is paved with small acts of courage and understanding." Sam's expression softened as he looked at Emma, seeing not just his teenage daughter but a glimpse of Sarah's spirit living on through her. The fury he'd felt at Emma's independent action melted away, replaced by a profound sense of pride mixed with humility. "May I share something your daughter wrote?" Rahim asked Sam. At Sam's hesitant nod, he read aloud, "Dad's trying really hard. He pretends to be tough, but I know he's hurting." Rahim looked up at Sam. "She sees with her heart, just as her mother did." Sam swallowed hard, unable to speak. Emma moved to sit beside him on the couch, slipping her hand into his. Later that evening, after Rahim had left, Sam and Emma sat at their kitchen table. He'd made her favorite pasta, and the familiar comfort food helped ease the emotional weight of the afternoon. The kitchen was warm with the lingering scent of garlic and herbs, and the soft glow of the overhead light created a cozy atmosphere. Emma twirled spaghetti around her fork, gathering her courage. "Mom would have wanted this, Dad," she said softly, looking up at him with eyes that held so much of Sarah's gentle wisdom. Sam set down his fork, studying his daughter's face. The anger that had been his constant companion since Sarah's death, the fury that had flared up again at the sight of Emma's letter, finally began to loosen its grip on his heart. He thought about Sarah's work with refugees, her unwavering belief in the power of forgiveness, and how she'd always told Emma that love was stronger than hate. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Sam nodded. "You might be right, sweetheart." he admitted, his voice rough with emotion. You might be right. The school gymnasium buzzed with nervous energy as people filed in through the double doors. Metal folding chairs creaked under the weight of townsfolk settling in, their whispered conversations echoing off the high ceiling. Basketball hoops hung suspended above, silent witnesses to what was about to unfold. Pastor John stood near the makeshift stage, really just a raised platform with a simple podium, greeting people with warm handshakes and gentle words of encouragement. His calm presence seemed to ease some of the tension in the room. Sam Reynolds shifted uncomfortably in his seat in the front row, tugging at his collar. Emma sat beside him, her hand resting reassuringly on his arm. She wore her best blue dress, the one her mother had bought her before she passed. It's going to be okay, Dad, she whispered, squeezing his arm gently. Veterans filled several rows, some in their old service caps, others in civilian clothes but bearing the unmistakable bearing of military men. Mike sat stiffly 3 rows back, his face unreadable. The local newspaper reporter scribbled in her notepad, while a TV cameraman from the regional station set up his equipment in the corner. At precisely 7 o'clock, Pastor John approached the podium. The gymnasium fell silent except for the soft whir of the ceiling fans. Friends, neighbors, he began, his voice warm but serious. We gather tonight not as enemies or strangers, but as human beings seeking understanding. What happens in this room could be a beacon of hope for communities far beyond our own. The side door opened, and Rahim entered, flanked by 2 federal agents in dark suits. He walked slowly, deliberately, his shoulders straight but his eyes downcast. He wore a simple gray suit that seemed to hang loosely on his frame. In his hands, he clutched a white envelope. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Someone in the back coughed loudly. It might have been a disguised scoff. Emma sat up straighter, her chin lifted defiantly. Rahim reached the podium, and Pastor John stepped aside with an encouraging nod. For a long moment, Rahim simply stood there, his hands trembling slightly as he unfolded his letter. The microphone picked up the soft rustle of paper. I stand before you, he began, his accented English clear but soft. Not as the man I once was, but as the man I wish to become. His voice gained strength as he continued. Many years ago, I gave orders that brought death to innocent people. I believed then that I served a righteous cause. I was wrong. Sam's jaw clenched, but Emma noticed his hands slowly uncurling from fists in his lap. My own son, Rahim's voice cracked slightly, was killed by the very violence I had helped create. It was then that I saw the truth, that hatred begets only hatred, that violence returns always to destroy the violent. In the audience, several veterans dabbed at their eyes with handkerchiefs. A woman in the 3rd row sobbed quietly. I cannot undo what I have done, Rahim continued. I cannot return fathers to their children, or children to their mothers. But I can stand here today and say, I am sorry. I am sorry with every breath I take, and I pledge the remainder of my life to building bridges where once I built walls. Emma glanced at her father and saw tears tracking silently down his cheeks. She reached for his hand, and this time he gripped hers tightly. To the soldiers who fought against the darkness I helped create, Rahim's gaze swept across the veterans, lingering on Sam. You showed more courage than I ever did. To the families who lost loved ones, your pain is my eternal shame. To this community that has allowed me to speak today, your willingness to listen gives me hope that peace is possible. Pastor John stepped forward, placing a supportive hand on Rahim's shoulder. The gymnasium was absolutely still, as if everyone was holding their breath together. Then, slowly, Sam Reynolds stood up. His movement seemed to break a spell, and scattered applause began to build. More people rose to their feet, including Mike in the back row, his face wet with tears. The applause grew louder, filling the gymnasium with its thunder. Emma beamed with pride as her father climbed the steps to the stage, each step careful with his old injury but determined. He extended his hand to Rahim, and the 2 men clasped hands firmly as the applause reached a crescendo. For one shining moment, it seemed as though all the walls of fear and hatred had crumbled. Pastor John's face glowed with joy, and even the federal agents allowed small smiles to crack their professional masks. Then came the sharp crack of gunfire from outside. The sound shattered the peace like glass breaking. Screams erupted as more shots followed. The federal agents immediately moved toward Rahim, while Pastor John grabbed the microphone. "Everyone, stay calm. Move away from the windows." People scrambled from their chairs, some dropping to the floor, others running for the exits. Emma felt her father's strong hands pulling her down behind the stage. Through the chaos, she could see the federal agents shielding Rahim with their bodies, rushing him toward a side door. More gunshots rang out, closer now. The sound of breaking glass filled the air as a window high in the gymnasium wall shattered. The screams grew louder, and the orderly meeting dissolved into complete chaos. The sharp crack of gunfire shattered the peaceful moment. Sam's military instincts kicked in instantly. "Get down!" he shouted, lunging toward Emma. In one fluid motion, he wrapped his arms around her and pulled her to the floor, shielding her body with his own. The gymnasium erupted into chaos. Screams filled the air as people scrambled for cover. "Dad!" Emma's voice trembled against his chest. "What's happening?" "Stay down, sweetie," Sam ordered, his eyes scanning the room. Through the pandemonium, he spotted Rahim still on stage, his federal escorts already moving to protect him. But they weren't fast enough. Another shot rang out. Rahim stumbled backward, clutching his shoulder. Blood seeped between his fingers, staining his neat brown suit. The federal agents finally reached him, pulling him down behind the podium as more shots peppered the wall behind them. Local police officers rushed toward the entrance, weapons drawn. Sam could hear shouts and the sound of a struggle outside. He kept Emma pinned beneath him, her heart racing against his chest. Around them, people crawled beneath chairs or huddled in small groups, some crying, others praying. "Clear!" came a shout from outside. "Suspects in custody!" Slowly, carefully, Sam lifted his head. Pastor John was helping people to their feet, his usual calm voice carrying across the gymnasium. "Everyone stay calm. The police have the situation under control." EMTs rushed in with a stretcher, making their way to where Rahim lay. The former Taliban commander was conscious, but pale. His breathing labored. As they lifted him onto the stretcher, his eyes met Sam's across the room. Even in pain, Rahim managed a small nod. "Emma, are you okay?" Sam helped his daughter sit up, checking her for any injuries. She nodded, but her face was ghost white, tears streaming down her cheeks. Is Rahim going to die?" she whispered. "No, sweetheart. He'll be okay." Sam pulled her close, but already he could feel the accusing stares from the people around them. "This is what happens when you invite terrorists here," someone shouted from the back of the room. "My kids could have been killed," another voice joined in. Sam helped Emma to her feet, trying to shield her from the angry voices, but they kept coming. "You brought this danger to our town, Reynolds. What were you thinking?" Pastor John tried to intervene. "Please, everyone. This is exactly the kind of hatred we were here to overcome." But the damage was done. As Sam guided Emma through the crowd toward the exit, people physically backed away from them, as if their presence alone was toxic. The next few days were brutal. Emma came home from school Tuesday with red eyes, her shoulders hunched against the world. She went straight to her room without a word. Sam found her there, curled up on her bed. "Want to talk about it?" She shook her head, then changed her mind. "Jenny told everyone I was friends with terrorists. No one would sit with me at lunch." Her voice cracked. "Even Miss Peterson looked at me different in English class." Sam's heart ached. He sat on the edge of her bed, gently stroking her hair. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. This isn't fair to you." "It's not fair to you either, Dad." Emma sat up, wiping her eyes. "You were trying to do something good. Why can't they see that?" Sam had no answer for her. The truth was, he was starting to doubt everything himself. Later that night, after Emma had finally fallen asleep, Sam sat alone at the kitchen table. The house felt too quiet, too heavy, with the weight of what had happened. His coffee had gone cold, untouched, as he sat with his head in his hands. The shooting played over and over in his mind. It could have been Emma. The thought made him sick to his stomach. He'd promised to protect her, to keep her safe, and instead he'd put her right in the line of fire. A car drove by outside, its headlights sweeping across the kitchen walls. Sam got up and went to the window. The spray paint on his fence caught his eye. Someone had been busy while they were at school and work. The old traitor was crossed out, replaced with new words in angry red letters. "Blood on your hands." Sam stared at those words until they burned into his vision. Maybe they were right. Maybe this had all been a terrible mistake. His desire to believe in redemption, to honor what his late wife would have wanted, had it blinded him to the reality of the world? Had he risked everything, his daughter's safety, his community's peace, for an impossible dream? The coffee cup in his hands trembled. He set it down before he could drop it, but his hands kept shaking. The weight of guilt pressed down on his shoulders until he could barely breathe. He sank back into his chair, the empty kitchen closing in around him. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. Sam flinched at the sound, his mind jumping back to the chaos in the gymnasium. He could still hear the gunshots, still feel Emma trembling in his arms. The image of Rahim falling, blood spreading across his shoulder, played again in his thoughts. The kitchen clock ticked steadily onward, marking time in a world that had somehow gone terribly wrong. Sam sat there in the darkness, haunted by the consequences of his choices, wondering how he could possibly fix what had been broken. Outside, the spray-painted accusation gleamed dully under the streetlight, a stark reminder that some wounds might never heal. The quiet of the house felt oppressive now, filled with unspoken fears and regrets. Sam remained at the table, alone with his thoughts. As the night grew deeper around him, Sam stood in Emma's bedroom doorway, watching her sleep. The moonlight filtered through her window, casting soft shadows on her peaceful face. His heart ached, knowing how much she'd been through. The clock on her nightstand showed 3:17 a.m., but sleep had become a stranger to him since the shooting 3 days ago. He quietly moved to the kitchen and slumped into a chair, spreading out real estate listings across the table. Properties in quiet towns, far from here, places where nobody knew their names or their story. Maybe Minnesota, or even further north, somewhere they could start fresh. The morning paper lay untouched on the counter. He couldn't bear to read any more headlines about the terror at town hall or see pictures of his neighbors being treated for minor injuries from the panic. The weight of responsibility pressed down on his shoulders like a heavy blanket. Emma's footsteps padded softly into the kitchen. "Dad? What are you doing up?" "Hey, sweetheart." Sam tried to discreetly gather the listings, but Emma was too quick. She snatched one from the table. "You want us to move?" Her voice cracked. "But this is our home. Mom's garden is here." Sam rubbed his tired eyes. "I'm just looking at options, Em, after everything that's happened. Running away won't fix anything." Emma sat down beside him, her hand finding his. "Remember what Mom always said? Face the storm, don't hide from it. Your mom didn't have the whole town blaming her for bringing violence to their doorstep." Sam's voice was bitter. "I saw how Susan Mitchell crossed the street yesterday when she saw you coming. And those kids at school, they're scared, Dad, just like we are." Emma's wisdom beyond her years never failed to surprise him. "But if we leave, we're telling them they were right. That there's no hope for understanding." The phone rang, startling them both. Sam checked the caller ID. "Pastor John." "Sam, sorry to call so early." The pastor's voice was gentle but urgent. "I just got word from the hospital. Rahim's asking for you." Sam's jaw tightened. "I can't, John. I've caused enough damage. He's insistent. Says it's important." A pause. "Sam, he's worried you're going to give up on everything you've built here. What we built." "All I've built is division and danger." "That's not true," Pastor John countered. "You've shown this community what real courage looks like. Rahim asked me to tell you something specific. The bridge of peace is built one stone at a time, and each stone requires 2 hands to place it." Sam glanced at Emma, who was watching him intently. Her eyes held the same determined hope her mother's once had. Later that morning, Sam walked down the sterile hospital corridor, his footsteps echoing off the walls. 2 federal agents nodded at him outside Rahim's room. Security was tight after the shooting. Inside, Rahim lay propped up against pillows, his shoulder heavily bandaged. Despite his injury, his eyes lit up when he saw Sam. "My friend," Rahim said warmly. "You came." Sam stood awkwardly by the door. "Pastor John said you wanted to see me." "Yes." Rahim gestured to the chair beside his bed. "Please sit. My nurses tell me you haven't visited since they brought me here. I thought it would be better if I stayed away." "Better for whom?" Rahim's voice was gentle but firm. "For the people who shot me? For those who wish to keep hatred alive?" Sam sank into the chair, suddenly exhausted. "I'm thinking of leaving town, taking Emma somewhere safer." "Safer?" Rahim shook his head slowly. The most dangerous place is where fear rules our hearts. I know. I lived there for many years. This is different. My daughter, your daughter, Rahim interrupted, has shown more courage than many grown men. She sees what we are trying to build. And what exactly is that? Sam's frustration leaked through. Because all I see is chaos and division. Rahim reached out with his good arm, clasping Sam's hand firmly. His palm was warm, human, so different from the monster Sam had once imagined him to be. We must stand together, Rahim said, his eyes intense with conviction. Only then will others believe. The simple truth of those words hit Sam like a physical force. He remembered Emma's face at the town hall meeting, before the violence, how proud she'd looked. How much like her mother. The extremists who attacked us, Rahim continued, they fear nothing more than unity between former enemies. Each time we stand together, their power diminishes. Sam looked down at their clasped hands, a former U.S. soldier and a former Taliban commander. The impossibility of it all struck him anew. I lost friends, Sam said quietly. Good men. How do I honor their memory by standing with the enemy? Rahim finished. You honor them by breaking the cycle that took their lives, by showing that their sacrifice can lead to something beyond more bloodshed. A nurse appeared in the doorway, clipboard in hand. Sorry to interrupt, but Mr. Rahim needs his rest. Before Sam could stand, Rahim's grip tightened on his hand. Promise me you won't run, he said urgently. Promise me you'll stay and finish what we've started. Sam looked into the eyes of a man who had once commanded forces against everything he held dear, but now he saw something else there. The same hope for a better future that he saw in Emma's eyes, in his late wife's memory. I promise, Sam said quietly. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows as Sam flipped pancakes at the stove. His movements were mechanical, his mind elsewhere. 3 cardboard boxes sat in the corner, a silent testament to his plans to leave town. Emma walked into the kitchen, her backpack slung over one shoulder. She stopped when she saw the boxes, her face falling. Dad, what are those for? Sam couldn't meet her eyes, just thinking it might be time for a fresh start somewhere else. He slid a pancake onto a plate and pushed it toward her. Somewhere people don't know us. You mean somewhere they don't know what we did? Emma didn't touch her breakfast. Instead, she pulled out a chair and sat down heavily. We didn't do anything wrong, Dad. Emma, honey. Sam started, but she cut him off. No, listen to me. Her voice was firm, reminding him so much of her mother that it made his chest tight. Running away isn't the answer. You taught me that. Remember when those girls at school were bullying me last year? You told me to hold my head high because we Reynolds don't run from our problems. Sam turned off the stove and sat across from her. This is different. Is it? Emma reached across the table and took his hand. Her small fingers were warm against his. Mom always said that doing the right thing isn't supposed to be easy. That's what makes it right. Sam looked at their joined hands, remembering how his wife had held his hand just like this when he'd returned from deployment, broken and angry. She'd helped him find his way back to himself then. Besides, Emma continued, her voice softer now, Rahim is still here. He's still fighting. If he can stay brave after being shot, we can be brave too. Sam felt something shift inside him, like a heavy weight being lifted. He squeezed Emma's hand. When did you get so wise? I had good teachers, she smiled, finally pulling her plate closer. So, what are we going to do about those boxes? Sam stood up, walked to the corner, and picked up the top box. With deliberate movements, he collapsed it flat. First, these go in the recycling. Then, I need to make a phone call. Emma's smile widened. To Pastor John? To Pastor John, Sam confirmed, reaching for his phone. The pastor answered on the second ring. Sam, I've been praying for you. Thank you, Pastor. Sam took a deep breath. I've been thinking. What happened at the gathering? We can't let that be the end of the story. No, we certainly cannot. There was a note of hope in Pastor John's voice. I want to propose another gathering. A bigger one. Show everyone that fear and hatred don't get the final word. Sam's voice grew stronger as he spoke. We need to prove that forgiveness is stronger than bullets. There was a pause on the other end of the line. You know, some people won't come. They're still angry, still afraid. Then we start with those who will come. We build from there. Sam watched as Emma cleared their breakfast dishes, humming softly to herself. Change has to start somewhere. Indeed it does, Pastor John's voice warmed. I'll start making calls. We'll need security this time, proper procedures in place. Whatever it takes, Sam agreed. We do it right. After hanging up, Sam spent the rest of the day making his own calls. To Mike, hoping to mend that fence, to the Federal Liaison Office about Raheem's recovery, to other veterans who might be willing to stand with him. As evening settled over the house, Sam sat at his desk in the study. A blank piece of paper lay before him, waiting for words. The task of writing his speech felt monumental. How could he explain something he was still trying to understand himself? His eyes drifted to the framed photograph on his desk. Sarah's smile beamed back at him, captured on their last anniversary before the cancer took her. She'd always known exactly what to say, how to make peace seem possible even in the darkest moments. I could use your help with this one, honey, he whispered to her picture. Sam picked up his pen and began to write. The words came slowly at first, then faster as he poured out everything he'd learned about forgiveness, not as a soldier or a veteran, but as a father watching his daughter's unwavering faith and goodness. He wrote about Sarah, about how she'd taught him to love again after the war, about Emma, and how her compassion had shown him a better way forward, about Raheem, and how seeing the humanity in an enemy's eyes had changed everything. The clock ticked past midnight as Sam continued writing, crossing out lines, starting over, determined to get it right. The photograph watched over him, Sarah's smile encouraging him forward, reminding him that love was always worth the risk. In the quiet of his study, surrounded by memories and hope, Sam Reynolds wrote about forgiveness not as an end, but as a beginning. The old stone church stood silent against the gray morning sky. Through the stained glass windows, shafts of colored light painted the wooden pews where people filed in quietly, their faces a mix of uncertainty and hope. Outside, a small group of protesters held signs, their angry voices muffled by the thick church walls. Sam Reynolds stood in the side room, adjusting his tie for the 10th time. His hands trembled slightly as he smoothed down the wrinkled paper of his speech. The words he'd written last night seemed inadequate now, facing the reality of what lay ahead. Dad? Emma's voice came softly from the doorway. She wore her best blue dress, the one her mother had bought her last Christmas. Pastor John says they're ready. Sam nodded, taking a deep breath. How many showed up? More than you'd think, Emma said with a small smile. The sanctuary's almost full. Through the crack in the door, Sam could see familiar faces. Mike sat near the back, arms crossed, but present nonetheless. Several of his veteran buddies occupied the middle pews, their expressions guarded. Mrs. Thompson from the grocery store was there, and even Mr. Peters, who'd been one of the loudest critics. Raheem sat in the front row, his arm in a sling, flanked by federal agents. Despite his injury, he sat tall, dignified. Their eyes met briefly through the doorway, and Raheem gave a slight nod of encouragement. Pastor John stepped to the pulpit, his voice carrying through the sound system. Brothers and sisters, we gather today not just as a community, but as people seeking understanding. Please welcome Sam Reynolds. Sam's legs felt heavy as he walked to the front. The microphone seemed to loom before him, and the rustling of paper sounded impossibly loud in the hushed sanctuary. Emma squeezed his hand once before taking her seat in the front row. I've faced gunfire in Afghanistan, Sam began, his voice rough. I've led men through minefields, but standing here today, this might be the scariest thing I've ever done. A few nervous chuckles rippled through the congregation. Sam cleared his throat and continued. Many of you know me as the stubborn vet who lives on Oak Street, the widower who works construction, Emma's dad. What you might not know is that for years, I've been carrying around anger like a bulletproof vest. Anger at the people who took my brothers in arms. Anger at the system that sometimes failed us. Anger at God for taking my Sarah too soon. He paused, glancing at Emma. Her eyes shone with tears, but she nodded encouragingly. When Raheem's letter arrived, that anger told me to burn it. When he showed up at my door, it told me to turn him away. But my daughter, his voice caught, my daughter reminded me of something my wife always said. Hate is too heavy a burden to bear. The sanctuary was completely still now. Even the protesters outside had gone quiet. I've seen what hate does. In the mountains of Afghanistan, in the streets of our town last week. It destroys everything it touches. But I've also seen something else these past few weeks. I've seen an enemy become a man. A man who lost his son to the same violence that took my friends. A man brave enough to say I was wrong. Sam turned slightly, meeting Raheem's eyes. When Raheem was shot, my first instinct was to protect my daughter and run. But running from hate doesn't defeat it. Standing together does. His hands had stopped shaking now. The paper with his prepared speech lay forgotten on the pulpit. Some of you have called me a traitor, but the real betrayal would be turning our backs on the possibility of peace. The real dishonor to our fallen would be letting their sacrifice fuel more bloodshed instead of building bridges. Tears were flowing freely down several faces now. Mike had uncrossed his arms, leaning forward in his pew. I'm not asking you to forget. I'm asking you to be brave enough to forgive, to be strong enough to see the humanity in those we once called enemies, because that's what my wife would have wanted. It's what I want for my daughter. It's what I want for all of us. Sam's voice grew stronger, filling the sanctuary. This isn't just about me and Raheem. It's about who we choose to be as a community, as human beings. Do we let fear win? Or do we show our children that love is stronger than hate, that courage isn't just for battlefields, and that grace can heal the deepest wounds? The silence that followed his last words hung in the air for a long moment. Then, slowly, people began to rise. It started with Pastor John, then spread like a wave through the sanctuary. The applause built gradually until it filled every corner of the old church. Through tears, Emma beamed at her father from her seat, her face glowing with pride and love. The morning light through the stained glass windows seemed brighter somehow, painting everyone in colors of hope. Sam stood at the podium, his speech complete, heart pounding in his chest. The sanctuary remained hushed, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Through the stained glass windows, rays of morning sunlight cast patches of colored light across the worn wooden floors, illuminating dust motes that danced in the stillness. At the back of the church, the double doors opened with a soft creak. Heads turned as Raheem entered, walking slowly but with dignity. His left arm was bound in a sling, and his face showed signs of fatigue, but his eyes held steady determination. 2 federal agents flanked him discreetly, scanning the crowd with professional vigilance. Sam watched as Raheem made his way down the center aisle. Some people shifted uncomfortably in their seats, while others nodded in quiet acknowledgement. Emma, seated in the front row, gave Raheem an encouraging smile. When Raheem reached the front, Sam extended his hand. Their handshake was firm, genuine, no longer the cautious gesture of former enemies, but the warm clasp of 2 men united in purpose. Together, they faced the congregation. Raheem pulled the letter from his jacket pocket with his good hand. The paper was creased from multiple readings, its edges soft. He unfolded it carefully, smoothing it against the podium. The microphone picked up the soft rustling. "My dear brothers and sisters," Raheem began, his accented voice clear and steady, "I stand before you again, humbled by your courage to listen." He paused, looking out at the faces before him. "The bullets that struck me last week carried the same hatred I once carried in my heart. But your presence here today shows me that love is stronger than fear." As Raheem read his letter of apology and reconciliation, Sam noticed subtle changes in the audience. Shoulders that had been tense began to relax, crossed arms slowly unclenched. Even those who had come with doubt in their eyes seemed to lean forward, caught by the raw honesty in Raheem's words. "I ordered attacks that took sons from mothers, fathers from children," Raheem continued, his voice thick with emotion, "until my own son died in an endless cycle of violence. That day, I saw clearly what hatred had stolen from all of us." In the third row, Mike, Sam's old army buddy who had once called him a traitor, wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. His wife squeezed his shoulder gently. When Raheem finished reading, the silence was different from before. It wasn't the heavy quiet of suspicion, but the soft stillness of shared grief and understanding. For several heartbeats, no one moved. Then, from the back of the church, someone stood up. It was Harold Jensen, a Korean War veteran in his 80s, who had been one of the loudest voices against the reconciliation. He made his way slowly toward the front, his cane tapping against the floor. Sam tensed slightly, uncertain of Harold's intentions, but when the elderly veteran reached the steps to the stage, he straightened his bent frame as much as he could. With deliberate movement, Harold raised his right hand to his forehead in a crisp military salute. Rahim's eyes widened in surprise. He returned the salute with his good arm, maintaining it until Harold lowered his hand first. "My brother fought in Korea," Harold said, his voice gruff but clear. "He used to tell me that the hardest thing wasn't fighting the enemy. It was learning to see them as human again afterward." He extended his weathered hand to Rahim. "Welcome to our town, sir." It was as if a dam had broken. People began rising from their pews, forming a line that stretched down the center aisle. Veterans, townspeople, even teenagers from Emma's school. They came forward one by one to shake Rahim's hand. Pastor John stepped to the microphone. "Let us pray together," he said softly. "For healing, for understanding, for peace." Sam and Rahim stood side by side at the front of the church, their heads bowed. Around them, the congregation joined hands across pews, across aisles, across the divisions that had seemed so insurmountable just weeks before. The morning light streamed through the stained glass windows, painting everyone in the same warm colors. No distinction between veteran and former enemy, no separation between neighbors who had stood on opposite sides of a fence. Just people, sharing the same sacred space, breathing the same quiet air, united in a prayer for something greater than their individual fears. Emma caught her father's eye from her place in the front pew, her face glowing with pride and hope. Sam felt something tight in his chest finally begin to loosen. Next to him, Rahim's whispered, "Amen," blended with hundreds of others, rising together toward the sunlit rafters of the old stone church. The morning sun cast long shadows across Sam's front yard as he stepped out onto his porch, coffee mug in hand. He paused, taking in the sight before him. 3 of his neighbors, the Hendersons from across the street and old Mrs. Watson from next door, were scrubbing at the angry red letters that had marred his fence for weeks. "Morning, Sam," called Mr. Henderson, his shirt sleeves rolled up as he worked. "Hope you don't mind us taking care of this eyesore." Sam's throat tightened. These were the same neighbors who'd drawn their curtains when Rahim first visited. "I appreciate it," he managed to say. Mrs. Watson straightened up, wiping her brow. "It's the least we can do, dear. And I've got a chicken pot pie in my car for you and Emma." Before Sam could respond, a minivan pulled up. Sarah Mitchell, whose son had been one of Emma's worst tormentors at school, stepped out carrying a covered casserole dish. Her eyes were red-rimmed as she approached. "Sam, she started, then looked down at the dish in her hands. "Tommy and I watched the video of your speech online. I wanted to apologize for everything." Sam set his coffee mug on the porch railing and descended the steps. "Come on in, Sarah. Emma's just finishing her breakfast." Throughout the day, more neighbors arrived. The Patels brought spicy biryani. The Johnsons came with fresh-baked cookies. Each visitor carried not just food, but words of remorse, support, and hope. Sam's kitchen counter disappeared under an array of dishes, each one a peace offering from the community. By afternoon, the fence was spotless, looking better than it had in years. The volunteers had even given it a fresh coat of white paint. Sam watched from his living room window as people came and went, some stopping to chat with others they'd previously avoided. Emma burst through the front door after school, her backpack bouncing. Her face was flushed with excitement. "Dad, you won't believe what happened today!" Sam turned from the window. "What is it, sweetheart?" "Jessica and Megan, they apologized. They said they were sorry for being mean, and they invited me to sit with them at lunch." Emma's eyes sparkled. "And in history class, mister, Peterson used your speech as an example of moral courage." The whole class applauded. Sam pulled his daughter into a hug, feeling her trembling with happiness. "I'm proud of you, Emma. You never lost faith, even when I did." "Can we do something to thank everyone?" Emma asked, pulling back to look at her father. "Maybe have people over?" Sam glanced at the mountain of food in the kitchen. "Actually, I've been thinking about that. How would you feel about hosting a barbecue this weekend?" Emma's face lit up. "Could we invite Rahim too?" "Already texted him." Sam smiled. "He's bringing his famous Afghan kebabs." The weekend arrived bright and clear. Sam fired up his old grill while Emma arranged tables and chairs borrowed from the church. The backyard had never looked better. Pastor John had organized a group of volunteers to mow the lawn and trim the hedges the day before. By mid-afternoon, the yard filled with guests. Veterans who'd once shunned Sam now stood in clusters, paper plates loaded with food, sharing stories and laughter. Mike, Sam's old army buddy, manned the grill alongside him, their friendship restored. Rahim arrived carrying foil-wrapped platters of marinated meat. Despite his injured shoulder, he insisted on helping to cook, showing Sam and Mike the proper way to grill Afghan-style kebabs. The rich, spicy aroma drew appreciative comments from the guests. Emma flitted through the crowd with a pitcher of fresh lemonade, her ponytail swinging. She moved easily between different groups, veterans, school friends, neighbors, refilling glasses and sharing smiles. The summer sun caught the ice cubes in her pitcher, making them sparkle like diamonds. "More lemonade, Mr. Peterson?" she offered to her history teacher, who had come with his family. "Thank you, Emma," he said, holding out his glass. "And thank you for sharing your father's story with our class. It's taught us all something important." Near the back fence, the same fence that had once broadcast hatred, Mrs. Watson chatted with Mrs. Patel about recipes. Their grandchildren played together on the lawn, their shrieks of laughter carrying across the yard. Sarah Mitchell's son, Tommy, who had once led the bullying against Emma, now helped her distribute paper plates and napkins. His face was red with embarrassment, but Emma treated him with the same kindness she showed everyone. Pastor John stood with a group of congregants, gesturing animatedly as he spoke. "And that's why forgiveness isn't just a personal choice. It's a force that can transform entire communities." Sam paused in his grilling to take in the scene. The backyard was filled with people who, just weeks ago, had been divided by fear and mistrust. Now they mingled freely, sharing food and conversation, their differences forgotten in the warmth of the afternoon. Rahim stepped away from the grill and stood beside him. "Your daughter?" he said softly, watching Emma pour lemonade for a group of elderly veterans. "She reminds me of my son. He too believed in the goodness of people." Sam nodded, remembering the letter Emma had written to Rahim. "She takes after her mother that way." The buzz of conversation and laughter filled the air, punctuated by the sizzle of meat on the grill and the clink of ice in glasses. Children chased each other across the grass while their parents talked and shared food. The atmosphere was relaxed, peaceful, a stark contrast to the tension that had gripped the town just days before. Emma returned to the grill, her pitcher nearly empty. "Dad, we're almost out of lemonade." "There's more in the kitchen," Sam said, "and grab some more ice while you're in there." As Emma headed inside, she paused to hug Rahim carefully, mindful of his injured shoulder. The simple gesture spoke volumes about how far they'd all come. Sam Reynolds stood in his living room, carefully adjusting the newly framed letter on the wall. The glass caught the warm glow of the evening lamp, making the handwritten words seem to shimmer. Next to him, Emma held the level, making sure the frame hung perfectly straight. "A little to the left, Dad," she guided, her eyes focused on the bubble in the small tool. Sam shifted the frame slightly, his movements deliberate and gentle. The letter, Rahim's heartfelt apology, had become more than just words on paper. It represented a journey, a bridge between two worlds that had once seemed impossibly far apart. The frame finally settled into place, its dark wood complementing the cream-colored walls of their modest home. Emma stepped back, tilting her head as she studied their handiwork. A soft smile spread across her face, her eyes bright with emotion. "Now the house feels complete," she said softly, reaching for her father's hand. Sam squeezed her fingers, taking in the sight before him. The letter hung between two other treasured pieces, a photograph of Emma's mother on their wedding day and Emma's middle school graduation picture. Together, they told a story of loss, love, and healing. Settling into his favorite armchair, Sam felt the weight of the past few months settle over him. He remembered the day that first threatening letter arrived, how his hands had trembled with fear and anger. Back then, he'd seen only danger, his soldier's instincts screaming at him to protect, to fight. But Emma had seen something different, just like her mother would have. The evening light filtered through the curtains, casting long shadows across the floor. Sam watched as Emma curled up on the couch with her homework, so much like her mother in profile. She had her mother's wisdom, too, that innate ability to see past fear to the humanity underneath. His journey from soldier to survivor hadn't been easy. The war had left its marks, visible and invisible. The limp from his old injury still bothered him on cold days, and sometimes the memories would wake him in the night. But being Emma's father had taught him a different kind of strength, the courage to keep his heart open, even when it hurt. And now, somehow, he'd become something else too, a peacemaker. The thought would have seemed impossible just months ago. Yet here he was, the man who'd once fought Taliban forces, now counted a former Taliban commander among his friends. The transformation in their community had been just as remarkable. Where there had been suspicion and hatred, understanding had slowly taken root. Sam thought of the neighbors who'd shown up to clean his fence, the casseroles that appeared on his doorstep, the veterans who'd stood up in church to support reconciliation. "Dad?" Emma's voice pulled him from his thoughts. "Want to sit outside for a while? The stars are coming out." Sam smiled, pushing himself up from his chair. "Grab the blanket," he suggested, following her to the front door. Their porch had become a sanctuary of sorts, a place where they'd weathered the worst of the storm together. The wooden steps creaked familiarly as they settled down, Emma spreading the old quilted blanket across their laps. The evening air was cool and sweet with the scent of late summer flowers. Above them, stars began to peek through the darkening sky, one by one, like old friends coming to visit. In the yard, the first fireflies of the evening began their dance, tiny lights blinking on and off like nature's own Morse code. Emma leaned against his shoulder, her presence warm and comforting. Sam wrapped an arm around her, marveling at how this young woman had become his greatest teacher in courage and compassion. "Do you think Mom would be proud?" Emma asked softly, her eyes following the firefly's path. Sam took a deep breath, feeling the peace that had gradually replaced his anger and fear. "I know she would be," he answered. "Especially of you." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the firefly display grow more elaborate as darkness settled in. A gentle breeze stirred the wind chimes Emma's mother had hung years ago, their soft melody mixing with the evening's natural symphony. Sam pulled his daughter closer, overwhelmed with gratitude for this moment, for the journey that had brought them here. "We're safe now," he whispered. "Not because the world changed, but because we chose to." Emma nodded against his shoulder, understanding in her silence. Together, they watched the fireflies dance in the growing darkness, their tiny lights, symbols of hope against the night sky. The peace they'd found wasn't just the absence of conflict. It was something deeper, something they'd built together choice by choice, day by day. What would you do if you were in their place? Comment your answer below, and let's see how you'd rewrite the ending. If you enjoyed the story of Sam Reynolds, I handpicked the next story that you will enjoy. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.